You ever get hit with a song you haven't heard in 15 years, and suddenly you are standing in your childhood kitchen, and nothing hurts yet? That specific kind of memory, not just remembering something, but feeling the entire temperature of a room that doesn't exist anymore. If you grew up in the 90s, your brain does this thing that other generations don't quite understand. And the psychology behind why it does that is way more complicated than just nostalgia. They're your coworkers who seem weirdly adaptable, but somehow always exhausted. Your friends who laugh at everything but talk about their anxiety like it is weather. The ones who can fix anything with duct tape and a YouTube tutorial, but can't explain why they feel behind on some invisible schedule. Maybe that is you. You turned out fine by most measures, but something in your chest tightens when someone asks, "Are you happy?" Not sad, exactly. More like you are carrying the weight of a world that promised you everything, and then quietly changed the rules. And here is what nobody tells you. The 90s didn't just shape your taste in music. They built the psychological operating system you are still running today. And most of it was installed before you were old enough to know it was happening. Picture this. It is 1996. You are 9 years old. School let out an hour ago, and you let yourself in with the key under the mat. Nobody's home, won't be for a while. You make yourself a snack, turn on the television, and that is it. That is your afternoon. No smartphone, no tracking app, no parent texting to check in. You are 9, and you are basically managing your own life for 4 hours a day. And this was completely normal. Research from the late 90s estimated millions of children were in self-care arrangements every single weekday afternoon. Nobody called it neglect. Nobody called it independence training. It was just how things were. You figured it out, or you didn't, and your brain filed that away as a core instruction. Handle things yourself. Don't make it someone else's problem. 42% of adults from latchkey childhoods scored significantly higher on self-reliance measures. But here is the catch. That same self-reliance came packaged with something else. A deep discomfort with asking for help, even when you desperately need it. Psychologists call it compulsive self-sufficiency. You learned that needing people was a vulnerability, not a right. But in plain English, it sounds like this. I'll figure it out myself because what is the alternative? Bother someone. And that shows up everywhere now. At work where you'd rather stay late than admit you are stuck. In relationships where you'd rather suffer quietly than say, "I need something from you." But here is what is fascinating. The independence wasn't even the most powerful thing the 90s installed in your brain. The real thing was the optimism. Because the 90s sold you a story, and you believed every word of it. Every classroom, every after-school special, every well-meaning teacher and guidance counselor repeated the same line over and over. You can be anything you want. Work hard, follow your dreams, and everything will work out. You are special. You are going to change the world. 3 promises. The world is fair. Effort equals reward. And you are destined for something extraordinary. Every 90s kid breathed that air. Psychologists now call this the self-esteem movement. And it had consequences. Nobody predicted at the time. Researcher Roy Baumeister spent years studying what happens when an entire generation is raised on unconditional praise, without matching it to actual skills. What he found was a gap. A canyon-sized gap between what these kids expected from adulthood and what adulthood actually delivered. And that gap has a name you've probably heard: imposter syndrome. The feeling that any success you have is a fluke in real life is about to call your bluff. Not because you are not capable, but because the 90s taught you that capable people don't struggle, and you struggle all the time. So every time something good happens, your brain runs the old program. This can't be real because real success is supposed to feel effortless. And there is this weird paradox nobody talks about. 90s kids are simultaneously the most confident and the most insecure generation in the room. Confident because you were told 1,000 times you could do anything. Insecure because reality kept whispering, "Yeah, but you haven't yet." But here is where it gets really interesting, because the 90s didn't just give you unrealistic expectations. They also gave you a specific kind of brain, a brain that was built in one world and then forced to operate in a completely different one, almost overnight. You learned to read from physical books. You did research at the library with actual index cards. Your social life happened on bikes and sidewalks, and then somewhere around 2001, 2002, everything migrated. Your friendships moved to screens. Your identity moved to profiles. Psychologists studying this cohort call them digital immigrants, people who learned the analog language first and then had to translate everything into digital, and that translation created something no generation before you had to deal with. A fractured sense of identity between your real self and your online self. You remember what it felt like to be bored, actually bored, with nothing to scroll, nothing to click, just your own thoughts sitting with you. And now you can't sit in a waiting room for 30 seconds without reaching for your phone. And you hate that about yourself. That tension between who you were built to be and who the world now demands you to be, that is not laziness or weakness. Psychologists call it identity discontinuity. The experience of feeling like your past self and your present self don't quite belong to the same person. But in plain English, it is this. You feel homesick for a version of the world that nobody else seems to remember existed, and you carry that homesickness like a low hum in the background of everything. Not grief exactly, but something close to it. And then there is the part nobody prepared you for. The moment the safety net disappeared and you didn't even see it happen. Because the 90s felt safe. Not perfect, but safe. Your parents worried about things like stranger danger and sugary cereal, not active shooter drills. And then Columbine happened and the Oklahoma City bombing. And September 11th happened when you were right at that age where you could understand what it meant, but not what to do with it. Psychologists who study generational trauma call this a worldview fracture. The moment when the story you were told about how life works cracks right down the middle. One day you are watching Saturday morning cartoons and believing the world is basically good. Then suddenly you are watching towers fall in your high school classroom, and nobody sat you down and said, hey, the story changed. They just expected you to update the operating system on your own. So you did what 90s kids always do. You adapted. Quietly, without making a scene, without asking for permission. You became fluent in anxiety, but learned to call it being realistic. You became hypervigilant, but called it being prepared. You became emotionally guarded, but called it not being dramatic. 3 translations. Anxiety became realism. Hypervigilance became responsibility. And numbness became maturity. And you believed all 3. And this is the part where I need you to really hear me, because what I am about to say might feel uncomfortable. You are not fine. You've been performing fine for 20 years, and you got so good at it that you convinced yourself it was real. The 90s taught you to be capable, adaptable, funny, low maintenance. But nobody ever taught you it was okay to fall apart. And psychologist Lindsay Gibson put it in a way that might hit a nerve. The most resilient children are often the most invisible ones, because they survive by needing nothing. That is you. You survived by being easy. By being the kid who didn't cause problems, who figured things out, who never asked twice. And that survival skill became your identity, the low-maintenance one. The one who handles things, the one who doesn't need. But here is the truth underneath the coping mechanism. You were never low maintenance. You just had low expectations for how much care you deserved. And maybe that is the most 90s thing of all. Building your whole personality around asking for nothing, and then wondering why you feel empty. But you are not empty. You are just full of things you were never given permission to feel. And that permission doesn't come from the decade you grew up in. It comes from you, right now, deciding that the kid who handled everything alone deserves to finally be taken care of by the adult they became. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, Hit that join button to become a channel member. I would genuinely appreciate your support, and maybe tonight, let yourself feel the thing you've been calling fine for 20 years, just to see what happens.